Hi guys, so before we get into it, a quick reminder that you'll find all my other Hammer reviews in my Hammer playlist, and there will be spoilers today for The Vampire Lovers. So I think we can say 100% that this is the first Hammer vampire film that is absolutely, definitely 100% not part of the Dracula verse. That's not actually a word. I say that mainly from my point of view because Peter Cushing's in this film and he's playing some kind of retired general character, i.e. he's not playing Van Helsing, and the idea that Cushing could be playing two different characters in the same universe, completely unacceptable to me. So as far as I'm concerned, this is absolutely a completely separate thing from Dracula. Plus, The Vampire Lovers, I believe, was based upon a novel that was written by somebody who wasn't Bram Stoker, so it probably would have been legally quite sticky to try and mix material from the Vampire Lovers novel with stuff from the Stoker novels. I just don't think that would have been viable even if Hammer had wanted to. So this is 100% a separate thing. It involves a family called the Karnsteins, and they are pretty much dead and finished at the start of this movie. Their stately home has gone to rack and ruin. They're all officially dead, but two or three of them are still surviving as vampires, and we mainly focus on this one young female vampire called Marcilla. She's got a few different names, but Marcilla's the one that is used the most in this film, I think, although the title of the original novel was Carmilla, another one of her names, but I'm going with Marcilla. She's got an interesting MO, this woman, because she likes to get herself invited into people's houses, people who she doesn't even know. For weeks of a time, she manages to get these invites. I don't think this would work outside of 19th century Gothic Austria. When I picture people having a traffic accident in modern day Britain, for example, you know, you get out your car to swap insurance details. I can't imagine somebody saying, oh, do you mind if my daughter comes and stays with you for a couple of weeks just while I get my head around all this insurance and paperwork and stuff? Is that all right? Oh, it is. Brilliant. That's not going to fly anywhere other than the time period and place where this movie is set. But Ingrid Pitt, in her role as Marcilla, quite easily manages to get herself invited into all kinds of nice 5-star accommodation all over Austria without ever paying for it. And once she's there, she then befriends whoever the most gorgeous young woman in the house is, usually the daughter of whoever the breadwinner is, and she will then become the lover of this woman. Not because there's a genuine attraction there, it seems to me, but usually because Marcella uses some kind of Jedi mind trick, and so they end up together. But Marcella will feed on this woman gradually until she's dead, and then she will just leave the house and move on to another victim somewhere else. That's basically what she does. Now, Ingrid Pitt is absolutely phenomenal in this role. I have seen her once before in Where Eagles Dare, one of my favourite films of all time, actually, but Pitt doesn't really stand out in that film. In fact, there's two female leads in Where Eagles Dare, sort of, but it's the other one who impresses for me whenever I watch that film. Ingrid Pitt, not so much, but I'm definitely going to keep an eye out for Pitt more the next time I watch Where Eagles Dare, now that I've seen The Vampire Lovers, because she's quite stunning in this film, and she gets nude, as do some of the other female characters in this film. I was not expecting nudity in this. That was a surprise to me. I knew that there was going to be vampire lesbian action to an extent, but I wasn't expecting nudity. And when it started to happen, I was like, whoa, this is a Hammer film. What's going on? Is this something that Hammer just brought in at the start of the 70s? And we're going to be seeing this more and more now as we head towards the end. I'm not sure how I feel about it, to be honest. I'm kind of on the fence. I used to think of the glamour in the Hammer films as being sophisticated, you know, for the more gentlemanly patrons of cinema to enjoy. What you get in this film, it's more towards kind of 2022 Shudder, but with real breasts for the most part, it seems to me, rather than fake ones. But I don't know. On the one hand, I really enjoyed some of the visual images that you get in this film. On the other hand, I'm not entirely sure any of this stuff is necessary. So I don't know. I can't quite make my mind up. I guess I'm just about on board with it, but certainly my wife wasn't impressed. I was watching this film and she was sat over there doing her paintings, and she looks up every now and again when she perceives that there's something interesting to see on the screen. And after about 5 or 6 scenes of women kissing women and boobs hanging out, she eventually just looked at me and said, "What is this that you're watching?" I was like, "Look, it's primarily it's meant to be a vampire film, you know? I watched the commentary track for this the other night, and I'm glad that I did, because after my initial viewing of the main film, my brain did go a little bit foggy in terms of trying to plan a review. All I could think about was the eroticism of the film and the nakedness of Ingrid Pitt. Watching the commentary track just allowed me to delve back into this whole thing and be reminded of the many good scenes of actual horror that happen, most of which take place at the dark, cobwebby Karnstein residence. There are a few scenes where Marcella goes back to her grave in a kind of white gown, ghostly visage kind of form, and it does get the goose flesh going. There's a couple of kills that happen in the dark woods as well. A lot of good material in this film that happens away from Marcella's daytime dating escapades, if you will. There is a weird thing in this where, so Marcella's victims, once they head down the slippery slope towards death, they'll start having these nightmares where they see these giant cats at the front of their bed, just kind of, rah. That's not what a cat does, you know, just like a kind of meow, but in large form, I suppose. Now, I don't know if I'm stating the obvious here, but these scenes, when they happen, is this being caused by Marcella polluting her victim's brain so that these women then start dreaming of pussy rather than men? And this is reflected in the symbolism of giant cats. Is that what's going on? If I'm wrong about this, then I've got no idea what the cats are actually there for or what their purpose is, given that this is a vampire film. So I don't know. One of the victims is played by Madeline Smith, who I know from Live and Let Die, because I'm a big Bond fan, but I didn't actually notice Madeline Smith in this film until I looked at the cast list after watching the whole thing. Smith looks extremely cute in this film. She does a very good job of standing out in this, given the fact that she spends most of her scenes acting alongside Ingrid Pitt in God mode, although Madeline Smith's attempts to depict an orgasm in this film are probably best not talked about, actually. Probably the biggest shame about this movie, though, is the fact that there's no genuine lesbians in it, or at least there's no confirmed genuine lesbians in it. I find that a real pity in a film which is essentially about lesbian vampirism. Now, I get that this film was set in the 19th century and it was filmed in 1970, and even the early 70s was a world away from 2023 when it comes to LGBT progress, for the want of a better phrase. I don't know what audiences at the beginning of the 70s would have been willing to accept when it comes to this sort of stuff, but it's really sad that you can have a film like this and not a single lesbian or bi character in it officially. The thing is, it would have helped this film excel even more if it had had at least one lesbian character in it, because if you look at the plot, so the way that it works, the structure of it, you've got Marcella going after this potential victim called Laura in the first act, and this goes on for some time, and then Laura dies. And then you've got this other massive section where Marcella does the same thing with somebody else. I think the second girl's name is Emma, I think. That's Madeline Smith's character. So you've got these two massive sections in the movie, but they kind of feel the same because of the fact that it's implied that both the victims are probably straight women who are just being Jedi mind tricked. So what I think they should have done is have one of these victims be a straight woman. Maybe that could have been Laura still. And then maybe the second woman could have been a closeted lesbian, and that would have made both sections feel very differently, because whereas Laura would have had to have been tricked into the lesbianism, the second girl could have instantly fallen in love with Marcella the moment she'd seen her, and then you would have had a relationship that would have been very, very different in feel, and it would have added to the drama, because maybe this second victim, potential victim, has secretly been keeping her feelings about women to herself, away from her father. Because remember, back in those days, you probably couldn't actually announce being gay or lesbian. Plus, if there had been a genuine lesbian character, then this could have really thrown Marcella for a loop. How would she have reacted to that? Because presumably she's only come across straight women so far while she's been going around killing people. So it could have made that whole second section a lot more interesting and exciting if they'd have done something different with the victim's sexuality. That's all I'm saying. I think the film that we've got, I think Marcella is the most likely character to be a lesbian just because of the fact that she's orchestrating this whole thing, but she's not necessarily that way out. She might just prefer the taste of female blood in the same way that I prefer brown sauce over red sauce, but that's not a reflection on my sexual orientation. So we don't actually know one way or the other whether Marcella genuinely likes women or not. There is a scene where she kills a guy outside of a pub, but this person dies straight away. It's not like a slowly developed relationship like it is with the women. But then again, we don't even definitely know that it's Marcella who kills this guy outside of the pub. Actually, it could have been one of her colleagues, accomplices, because they need to feed too, presumably. They're not just stood in the woods with binoculars all the time, seeing how Marcella's getting on. I've got to quickly mention one of the pub scenes in this film because it's absolutely dreadful. It's clearly, excuse me, it's clearly a pickup shot. So there's a moment later on where a couple of characters, they have this discussion in a pub, but you can tell it's been done in like post-production because there's no rest of the pub. It's just like a soundtrack of pub noise, and it just looks really bad, especially the moment where one of them mentions the word vampire and then this pub soundtrack just instantly stopped. Not a great scene. And this in the same film where we've had this really extravagant ball scene earlier in the film where all the principals are there and you've got all these extravagant costumes and brilliant choreography with the dancing and stuff. It's a scene that's like almost the centerpiece of the movie. Lots of effort's been thrown into it. And then you compare that to this really bad pub scene later on. It's almost like a reflection on society that the wealthy get all the effort put onto them and all the extravagance and the money, and the poorer elements, they don't even get to be in their own pub scene because, yeah, it's not that glamorous. We're not going to bother with that scene too much. So before we wrap up, I'll quickly show you the version of the film that I've got. Here is my Blu-ray copy of The Vampire Lovers, which strangely depicts Ingrid Pitt as She-Hulk attorney at law, but she looks great in the movie. That's the main thing, isn't it? This copy of the film wasn't actually done by Studio Canal like so many of the other Hammer films from this kind of time period. This one was done by Final Cut Entertainment, but the quality is exactly the same as what you would get with a Studio Canal one, and there's plenty of features on this. There's a 25-minute documentary called New Blood, Hammer Enters the 70s. I should probably watch that. It might explain a lot about the choices Hammer went for in this. There's also an audio commentary with Marcus Hearn and Jonathan Rigby. I've seen these two guys do commentaries before, and they're always really good. And I did actually watch the vast majority of this commentary, as I indicated earlier. In my head, I watched all of it, but actually, come to think of it, I think I did check out with about 15 minutes to go. I had to get to bed, but I watched a lot of it, and there's some really great insight on the track. It definitely helped me with just finalising my views on the film, I think. And there's some other features on here, stills gallery, trailer, restoration, comparisons, some smaller features, but in general, it's a really good package, and it only cost me £8, I think, on eBay, brand new. Really good price for this. Right, let's get to the bag of terror and find out what sort of score I'm going to give The Vampire Lovers. So we got 1, 2, 3... 3.5 bloody axes out of 5. An enjoyable film. I've resisted the temptation to take off some points because of some opinions I have on, you know, the fact that there's no lesbian characters in the movie, and one or two other things that did bug me a little bit. I've tried to judge this film on how it would have been coming out in 1970, you know, rather than pick on it for not doing certain things that other films would do if they came out in 2023, if you know what I mean. I've tried to be fair that way. I did like it. I did enjoy it. As to how I compare it to the Dracula films of Christopher Lee, I wouldn't say that this one is better than any of those films off the top of my head, but it's certainly towards that same league. It's just very different, obviously. But I'll certainly watch it again. You know, I'm sure there will come a day in the future where I just fancy a bit of naked Ingrid Pitt and throw this movie on, maybe with a little side dish of Madeline Smith. That just sounds so wrong. Let's wrap up.